Bitcoin closes the futures gap, altcoins are dropping, the overall market is falling, and new opportunities are entering the market. We're going to talk about all of them, look at liquidations, macro news, and a ton of other information today. So without further delay, let's get started. And we'll start with the economic calendar from investing. What do we have today? Well, we haven't had much going on. At 2:30, we had core retail sales and retail sales. The results were more or less as expected, maybe even a little worse than expected, but in any case, it wasn't an extremely bad figure, so we don't expect this to have much impact on the market. Tomorrow, obviously, it's Saturday, so there's nothing scheduled. For Monday, just to mention it a bit in advance, there's nothing either because it's a holiday in Japan and in the United States, so there won't be any data released. What will be very, very important is next Tuesday, which we'll probably discuss calmly, basically on Monday in the Bitcoin video analysis. As I said, there's nothing else from investing, so let's go straight to trading different to check out Bitcoin liquidations. How is Bitcoin doing right now? Well, Bitcoin just liquidated a small area it had down here. In fact, there's still a bit of a zone left down here, but be careful, okay? This zone goes down to 115,000. Bitcoin could still easily drop to 115,000 and from there hit bottom. In any case, it's very risky, at the point where we are now, to look for shorts because the bottom is between 117, which we just touched, and 115. That's basically $2,000 of margin where Bitcoin could hit bottom. Basically, you can see it here, right? But let's zoom in a little more on the chart. These liquidations aren't that important. I could easily just ignore them, okay? In any case, if we zoom in a bit more and look at the short term, we see that the $126,000 area is a much more significant liquidation zone than what we have at 115. Again, there are liquidations at 115, and Bitcoin could go there, but they're not important enough to really take into account, at least for now. For now, due to other types of indicators, we could think that we're hitting bottom, whether it's at 117, 116, or somewhere around these areas, and that a possible big rebound is coming for both Bitcoin and the altcoins. So, with that said, let's go ahead and analyze Bitcoin. Basically, I want us to start with what's important. On Monday, we already mentioned that Bitcoin had opened with a futures gap, and that the most likely scenario was that we would close that gap. Well, yesterday evening, we were about to close it completely and we were just $150 away. Alright. Finally, today we've closed the futures gap and I'm going to show you. Remember that you can see the futures gaps on BTC1. That's basically what you need to look for on TradingView. If you look here, all of this was a futures gap on Monday, part of it was closed here on Tuesday, then on Thursday another part was closed, and today it's finally been completely closed, okay? It's finally closed at least. I recommend you check the futures gaps on the 4-hour chart. There's no need to even look at the 1-hour chart, okay? So, 1-hour chart, 4-hour chart, daily chart, all of that has already been closed. There is no futures gap. The problem is, it's Friday. If there's a lot of movement over the weekend, there will be a new futures gap, okay? We don't want that either. But anyway, the gap is closed, and at this point, we no longer have a reason to keep dropping, at least as far as this is concerned. But let's move on to a slightly longer-term view to see what Bitcoin is doing. Like I said, the gap is closed, so there's nothing more to say about that. Daily chart. Well, we already mentioned that yesterday's candle was pretty bad and that it would lead to a couple or 3 days of declines. Well, today the price isn't crashing, it's holding up well. There's an important support level in this area I've marked at $116,300, mainly because it's a zone that used to be an old support, and now it's acting as support again, okay? We're talking about this whole area right here. Bitcoin stayed above this entire level for many days here. It's likely that Bitcoin will continue to hold above it. $116,450, $116,500. It's extremely important for Bitcoin to hold this entire area here. If Bitcoin breaks below and closes daily candles underneath, things could get complicated and we might see drops to 115,000, which would be the lower liquidation zone. But for now, there's no need to worry too much. We're still doing fine, okay? So, 4-hour chart, as I mentioned, the futures gap has already been closed. What's important is that right now, with the last candle, we've lost the 200-period moving average. Yesterday we didn't do it, but today we did. Well, we have to wait and see what the next candles do, whether we stay below, because if in this candle that just started right now, which still has 3 hours and 10 minutes left, we close above it again, It'll be a fake breakout of the 200 period moving average area plus a futures gap closure. It would be quite bullish if we recover the moving average. I repeat, if we don't recover the average, we could stay here for several more days, especially throughout the weekend and then starting Monday, looking for rebounds. But the important thing would be to start bouncing now, in the next few hours, before the daily candle closes. That would be really good for us and, as I said, it would make Bitcoin quite bullish again. 1 hour chart of Bitcoin. What can we see here? Look, every time we touch these areas around here, we've had significant rebounds and a lot of wicks. And look, right? Now we've gone a little lower to liquidate, and both candles have really good wicks, okay? We also have a bullish divergence on the MACD, a bearish crossover on the MACD in negative territory, which usually turns out to be a trap move, and even a bullish divergence on the RSI. So, bullish divergence on the MACD, RSI, MACD is about to go up, and, well, with a lot of wicks on the lower side. Everything on the 1 hour chart is telling you it's bullish, absolutely everything. That's why, for that very reason, I've opened some longs and I'm going to show you now. Not just the longs, but also how I've been trading these past few days. So before I show you those longs, since you already see what Bitcoin is going to do in the short term, let's go straight to the altcoin analysis. Today is going to be a more general analysis, like I tend to do from time to time. Why? Well, because I want you to see it. We've already mentioned this to you many times. When we're in a bull market, a bull run, or an alt season, it's important to keep in mind that a lot of people, for example, when Ether is at $4,700, want to go long and want to buy. Well, Ether has already dropped 8.5% from its peak. Cardano, from its peak, has dropped as much as 13% since yesterday. ENA, for example, from its peak, has dropped 20% in just about 48 hours. And all the cryptocurrencies, all the altcoins, look, Solana, for example, has dropped 12%. During bull runs, there are usually quick drops, and these drops happen very fast, but the recoveries are just as quick. So, this is exactly what we were expecting. There are people who will try to take advantage of this to open new cycle longs, that's for sure. There are people who are going to take advantage of this to open longs for a bit more of the long term or to buy in spot. And honestly, that's really the best thing you can do in this situation. Why? Because, I repeat, every time there's a drop of between 10 and 20% in altcoins, it usually means great opportunities to take advantage of the next moves. Because yes, indeed, nothing goes up forever and nothing goes down forever. In this case, we're clearly in a bullish move with altcoins and, well, we've just had about 48 hours of correction. I think these 48 hours of correction are really going to surprise people with how quickly everything can bounce back. And in this case, for example, I'm personally trying to take advantage of it. So, well, every time I see a drop of around 10, 15, or 20%, CryptoHEX is going to add a bit to the longs. CryptoHEX might even increase its cycle longs a bit, and that's kind of what I want to do, you know? And look, for example, Ripple, same story, it dropped more than 11%. If you wanted to buy Ripple at $3.3, why don't you want to buy it at $3? You're getting scared, you're falling victim to market sentiment, right? Look at how people are, like I posted about it yesterday on Telegram, and it's pretty funny to see how market sentiment changes a lot and changes really fast. And this is key, because, for example, yesterday there were already comments saying Bitcoin is going to 109,000, comments saying Bitcoin is going to 40,000, comments saying you have to sell everything and come back in 4 years because the bear market has started. Comments like these are very, very relevant, because they tell you exactly what the market sentiment is. And right now, people are scared. And this isn't exactly the time to be afraid, it's the time to take advantage of the opportunities during an alt season in a bull run, okay? Because later, when Bitcoin is at 122 and Ether is at 5,000, people will want to come and buy, and that's not the time to buy. The time to buy is when opportunities like the one we have right now come up, okay? So, well, that's a bit of the general analysis of altcoins, which is important for us to keep in mind. Look at Radium, for example, how it's doing. Look at how Radium is dropping, right? More than 15% as well. It's about taking advantage of all this a little. Not buying at the highest peaks, but when there are those corrections and when people start to get scared. That said, let's move a little quickly and I'll show you the trades I have open right now. Right now, I have a long position open on Bitcoin. As you can see here, I'm making about $1,000 or so, but that's not what's important today. Well, now it's 1300, it's going up a bit, okay? Take a look at the trade history. I've been doing scalping, okay? These are up to the ones I showed yesterday. Today, for example, it's been these four, right? Plus 600, plus 30, plus 500, plus 100, and well, these 1,000 I'm making right now. So, little by little, just scraping from the market, both longs and shorts, both Bitcoin and some altcoins. Little by little you get into it, and little by little you do a bit of scalping. Remember that you have the guide on how to do scalping, taking advantage of the big volatility we've had these last few days. It's really good to take advantage of that volatility to squeeze a little bit out of the market. So, like I said, in this case I'm already in a long position on Bitcoin. Yes, I think Bitcoin has already touched the 117,000 zone, especially now that the futures gap has closed. Obviously, I don't think we're going to see big moves over the weekend, but it would be great if Bitcoin could recover to the $118,000 zone before the end of today, so we can stay around that area over the weekend and then on Monday make a move upward, okay? Obviously, we'll see if it has the strength, the power to do that, but, well, that's what would be nice to see happen over the weekend. Starting Monday, I would expect big upward moves, recoveries both in Bitcoin and in the altcoins. I repeat, Bitcoin usually doesn't move much on weekends, but it's not the same with altcoins. Altcoins don't have, futures markets waiting for them, so there won't be any gaps forming. So, even though Bitcoin is pretty boring over the weekend right now, it's the time for altcoins to shine, for some Bitcoin money to flow into altcoins, and for us to see altcoins like Cardano going up 8% or Solana rising 4% again. These things can easily be seen over a weekend. And it's kind of for that same reason that I think it's a good opportunity to take advantage of everything that's happening right now and not fall victim to market sentiment. So, well, let me know in the comments what you think. Do you think, well, that the gap has finally been closed? Do you think that from here on out we're going to recover? Or do you think we still have a bit more to fall? I'd like to know your opinion. See you in the next video. See you tomorrow. Well, not tomorrow, on Monday. See you soon. Bye.